I'm so glad you're here. Stay with me until the end and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this story travels. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I came home and found my bed on the curb. It's just sitting there, like trash. The mattress leaning sideways, my pillow in a plastic bag, as if even it had shame. Inside, where my quiet little room had always been, pale blue walls. The dresser with my wedding photos, the window that faced the garden there, were now free weights and mirrors. My son had moved my things out to turn my room into a gym. He didn't tell me beforehand. He just did it. He said he thought I'd like the change. Said I could sleep in the guest room, the one with no window, no heat vent, and boxes stacked. So high I couldn't walk without my cane catching on cardboard flaps. When I asked why, he laughed and said I didn't need space. I needed structure. His wife giggled, like it was funny. Like it wasn't a full erasure of where I used to exist. It was quiet after that. It's the kind of quiet that crawls under your skin. I remember the first time I saw him, newborn, eyes closed, fists clenched like he'd fought his way into the world. I held him close and whispered a promise to never let him feel alone in it. I think I kept that promise longer than he ever noticed. I worked nights at the hospital, cleaned offices on weekends, skipped meals so he could have seconds. For years, I didn't have a door that locked, but I gave him a world that felt safe. He used to call me his favorite person. I remember one birthday. He couldn't have been more than 9. He made a crown out of construction paper and wrote Queen Mom on it in red crayon. He cried when I put it on, said I looked like someone important. But somewhere along the way, my importance shrank, not all at once. More like the tide pulling back inch by inch until I was just a dry patch on the shore. At first it was little things. Him turning the TV up while I spoke, telling me not to talk about my knees when his friends were over. Then it was bigger. Canceling my doctor appointments because they interfered with his gym schedule. Asking if I really needed so many medications. Saying I should be grateful he let me stay, like the home I'd helped pay for hadn't belonged to me too. His wife started screening my calls. Told me I needed more rest, more alone time, less complaining. When I asked about seeing my granddaughter, she said children needed structure too, not stories about the past. One night I heard them through the vent. Their room was above the kitchen, and the air duct carried sound like a whisper through. A keyhole dot, she was saying it was time to start the process. That I wasn't in my right mind. That her friend knew a lawyer who specialized in guardianship. That the paperwork would be cleaner if they said I'd been confused lately. Misplacing keys, repeating stories. He didn't argue. He just said. He didn't want drama. The next morning, I found the mail already opened on the counter. My bank statements missing. I asked him if he'd seen them. He said I must have misplaced them again. It's the way he said again. Like it had already begun. Like I had stepped into their story of me without even noticing. I waited until they left for a weekend trip to some wellness retreat. They didn't ask if I needed anything. Just left a frozen casserole and a list of vitamins on the fridge. I called an old friend Anna from my church years ago. She knew someone, a woman who worked with seniors on estate issues. Quiet, discreet, no pressure. I brought her the old paperwork I'd kept back when the house was refinanced in my name. Before I added my son for convenience. Before convenience became consent. Before he changed the locks on the filing cabinet and replaced the mailbox. Key, without telling me. I spent nights combing through every document. Found one, an old notarized copy of the deed. Turns out, I still had more power than they realized. Turns out, the bank doesn't care about birthday cards or Sunday dinners. Cares about names. And my name was still first. So I called the bank. And then I called a lawyer. And then I called a buyer. When they came home and found a for sale sign on the lawn, he looked confused. She looked ready to fight. I told them calmly the house was never theirs to change. Not the locks, not the rooms. Not me. He said I was overreacting. Said it was just a gym. I told him it was never about the weights. It was about the weight of being erased. And I was done carrying it. I moved into a little one-bedroom downtown. It smells like rosemary and new paint. I bought myself a recliner, put my wedding photo on the side table, hung sheer curtains over the window, the kind that catch morning light like they're holding it just for me. I changed my will, left my name on the only things that matter. Took his off where it didn't note now. When I walk, it's slow, but it's mine. There's no music blasting overhead. No one telling me to stay quiet or move faster or disappear into storage. Just me. Still here, not a burden, not a bench press, and certainly not someone who can be moved without her permission. I remember the first time I saw the house, the way the sunlight touched the kitchen tiles, the porch swing leaning just slightly left, like it had already heard a few secrets and was waiting for more. Back then, the house wasn't big. It wasn't anything you'd brag about. But it had bones, honest ones. And I saw possibility in every corner. I saw a future where my son would laugh barefoot in the hallway, where meals would be cooked without looking at the clock, where no one would ever feel like they had to ask permission to belong. I bought that house with my late husband back when the bank still printed things out on yellow carbon paper. We signed everything in person. We shook hands. There was no app to tap, no digital form to forget. It was all done slowly, carefully, together. He died too early. Heart attack on a Tuesday. I remember because that morning he made me coffee, left the spoon in the cup, and kissed my shoulder while I stared at the newspaper. And then he was gone. Just like that. I didn't cry right away. I went to work the next day, told everyone I was fine, cooked dinner like usual. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, when I found his jacket on the back of the chair, that I finally let myself fall. That house held me in pieces. It gave me walls to lean on when I had no one else. And my son, he was 16 then. He never once asked for less. He folded laundry without being told, sat with me in silence when words didn't work. For a while, I thought grief had drawn us even closer. I was wrong about a lot of things. But I was never wrong about loving him. That was real. After college, he moved back in to save money. I was glad. Felt full again. The house had quieted in his absence. The kind of silence that seeps into your bones and makes you question whether you're still needed. But when he came back, it felt like breath returned to the rooms. I helped with a down payment on his car. He promised he'd pay it back. I told him not to worry. Then his job got serious. Late nights, bigger paychecks. New suits in the front, closet. He started paying part of the mortgage, and eventually, at his insistence, we refinanced the house to put his name on it, just in case anything happened to me, he said. Just to make sure things were easier, he called it protection. I called it love. But the paperwork just called it legal. He got married in the backyard. String lights from the fence to the shed, her dress brushing the grass. I baked the cake myself, lemon poppy seed with lavender icing. They said it was perfect. That was the last time she really looked me in the eyes. After that, she slowly took over. First, the living room. She wanted a minimalist look. My books disappeared into boxes. Then the kitchen. She didn't like my spices. Said the labels were messy. Then the hallway photos replaced with abstract prints in gold frames. I was allowed the guest room. Wasn't called my room anymore. She started referring to me as her husband's mother. Not mom. Not even by name. At dinner parties, she'd introduce me like an afterthought, someone who came with the house, like the old fireplace or the drafty pantry. Still, I stayed, because staying is what I've always known how to do, because I thought love meant holding on, even when it hurts. One night, I came into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. They were there, already talking. She said I was getting harder to manage, that she felt like she had 2 kids now. He laughed, said maybe it was time to nudge me towards something smaller. A condo, a facility, something with services. He said I deserved rest, that it wasn't safe for me to handle the bills, the chores, the decisions. He said it like it was. Kindness, like being erased, was a mercy. I didn't say a word. I just stood there behind the corner wall, hands trembling around a warm glass of water. I waited for someone to say I was listening. But no one did. That's when I began keeping records. Every document, every email, every receipt. I bought a small, locked file box and tucked it in the back of the coat closet behind my old rain boots. I started recording things on a little notepad. Dates, names, who said what and when. I wasn't confused, I wasn't broken, I was awake. I was beginning to understand. Sometimes betrayal doesn't scream. It whispers from the people you trusted most. It walks past you with clean hands and tidy smiles. It's taking pieces of you while you're still trying to set the table. The night they turned my bedroom into a gym, I didn't cry. I waited until they left the house for dinner and walked quietly into the garage, stood there and looked at my mattress shoved behind boxes, slumped against a lawnmower. My dresser sat open, drawers half empty. My wedding photo still had a bit of dust on the frame, like it had been flicked once and forgotten. I picked it up, wiped the glass with my sleeve. I said to myself, not out loud, but clearly, deliberately, I will not be stored away. Not while I'm still breathing, so I went back inside. I boiled water for tea. I sat at the kitchen table, lone in the light of a single overhead bulb, and I started planning. It started with the bank statements. One afternoon, I asked my son if the mail had arrived. He barely looked up from his phone, just waved a hand toward the counter and said everything worth reading had already been opened. I searched through the stack. Coupons, a glossy magazine that wasn't mine, 2 pre-approved credit card offers, but no envelope from the bank, no monthly summary. And for the 3rd month in a row, no pension statement either. I stood there a while, holding the empty pile like it might confess something. Later that night, after they had gone to bed, I tiptoed to the recycling bin outside. I didn't take a flashlight, just let the moon catch on the curve of the metal lid. I lifted it carefully, dug gently. There it was, the envelope from the bank, torn open, crumpled like it meant nothing. I took it out, smoothed it against my palm, my name, my account. But the address, it had been changed. They had forwarded my statements to a post office box. Not mine, not one I'd ever signed for. I stood in the driveway, holding that paper, the wind curling at the edges like it was trying to whisper. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I had. And that changed everything. When I confronted him, I kept my voice even. I asked why my mail was being redirected. He said it must have been an error. Said the bank makes mistakes. I asked how they knew. About the post office box. He blinked. Said maybe I filled something out and forgot. His wife appeared in the hallway, arms crossed. Told me I needed to rest more. That maybe I should stop checking the mail altogether. It was clearly causing stress. They smiled like they were helping. Like I was fragile. Like I didn't know my own name. That's when I understood the plan wasn't sudden. It had been slow, methodical. Each change disguised as care. Each erasure softened with words like support, safety, simplifying. The pills I took for blood pressure, she started putting them in a plastic organizer so I wouldn't forget. But the doses changed. One day I realized they looked different. When I asked, she said the pharmacy switched brands. She told me not to worry about the details. Then came the appointments, cancellations, reschedules. Suddenly, my primary care doctor retired, or so they said. I never got the letter. They signed me up with someone new, someone younger, someone they drove me to and sat in on. She asked all the questions. He nodded with concerned eyes. And I, apparently, was the subject of concern. The new doctor said things like, at your age, and it's natural to forget. And maybe someone else should handle your medications from now on. I felt myself shrinking in that chair. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. They were painting a picture of me, blurring the edges, fading the definition. I could be reinterpreted as someone who needed permission to exist. That night, I opened the closet in the hallway, behind the coats, beneath the scarves and the umbrella that never got used. I pulled out the file box. It was heavier than I remembered. Inside, neatly folded, were years of documents, the original house deed, insurance forms, letters from my husband. I touched each page like it was skin. and then I found it. The refinance paperwork from 4 years ago. I remembered the meeting at the bank. The way my son had smiled told the loan officer I was tired and he'd handle the technical parts. I remembered signing the forms. But I also remembered the notary handing me a second copy, quietly, with a glance that said, "Keep this one safe." That notary saved my life. She didn't know it, but she did, because on that copy, right there on the signature line, I had initialed a clause he had hoped I wouldn't notice, a clause that preserved my majority ownership, a clause that left me with controlling interest in the property and the legal right to do whatever I wanted with it. I sat on the carpet and read that clause 5 times. Okay. Each time I felt a little taller. Each time I remembered a little more clearly who I was before they made me question it. The next day, I called the notary's office. She was still working, still sharp, still kind. She remembered me, said she always kept digital records of her signings, just in case. I told her I might need them. She said to call any time. After that, I walked to the library, signed up for a computer. Class learned how to scan documents, opened a secure folder online, saved every file I had. I asked a woman in the class, a retired teacher named Marcia, if she knew anything about estate planning. She laughed and said, "More than I'd like." We met for tea the following week. She brought brochures, phone numbers, even a list of elder law attorneys. I didn't cry. I didn't tell her everything, but I looked her in the eye and said I had reason to prepare. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded, like she'd seen this kind of quiet war before. It felt good. To be believed. To be seen. Asterisk. To have someone say, "You're not crazy, you're not broken, you're just waking up." That night, I sat in the living room. They were upstairs. I could hear the treadmill, the soft bass of music, the hum of their lives carrying on. And I was there, below, in the house I had bought, in the home I had kept whole, plotting my return to power. The house began to feel like something I was haunting. I moved through it quietly, deliberately, like if I made too much noise, they might remember I was still there. I timed my steps around their routines. I ate when they weren't in the kitchen. I waited until late to run the washer, knowing the hum would be mistaken for the fridge. I even stopped using the porch swing. It squeaked too loud, too long, too much, a reminder of who used to sit there. But something in me had shifted. Not anger, not even defiance, just a kind of cold clarity. I started noticing what they didn't hide well. The way she'd lock her office door when she left for errands. It's a stack of manila folders she moved from drawer to drawer. The hush in their voices whenever I walked by. He once left a browser tab open on the computer in the hallway. It was a senior care facility 1 town over, with the phrase "luxury assisted living" underlined in green. I didn't touch the computer. I didn't say a word. I just memorized the name and walked away. They thought they were being discreet, but there's something they'll never understand. Silence isn't confusion. Silence is strategy, especially for someone who's had to survive by watching, listening, waiting. I started going through my mail before they could get to it. I called the post office and asked to have it held. Said I was worried about porch theft. The woman at the desk was kind. She wore pink glasses and smelled like mint gum. She said, of course, and every Tuesday I'd walk down and collect it. Myself. That's when I found the envelope from the financial planner. My name was on it, but it wasn't addressed to the house. It had been forwarded again, but this time the sticker peeled halfway, revealing the original line underneath. The address on file was the same post office box from the bank statement, but this time it came from a firm I didn't recognize. I called the number, pretended to be confirming an appointment. The woman on the line said yes, I had a standing account there under a shared family trust. I asked who created the trust. She hesitated, then read out my son's name, followed by the words "primary executor." I thanked her, hung up, and sat down right there on the curb outside the post office. Cars passed. The wind tugged at my coat. And I let myself feel it. Not anger, not betrayal, but grief. The kind that doesn't take your breath away. It gives it back. I ate, and it tastes like dust He had planned to remove me not just from the house, but from the story altogether. Rewrite the future. Put my name on the dotted line only where it served his version of things. That kind of erasure isn't loud. It's careful, and that's what made it cruel. I went home. I pulled out the big manila envelope where I'd been, keeping everything, the deed, the notary's letter, my pension documents. Even the receipts from the lawyer I'd quietly consulted. I laid them out on the bed in the guest room, the one they shoved me into, the one with no window, the one they never bothered to dust. I sat cross-legged in the middle of the mattress, papers surrounding me like puzzle pieces. My knees ached. My back reminded me I wasn't 20 anymore. But my mind had never been sharper. I started calling numbers, set appointments, booked rides with the community shuttle, took notes in a fresh spiral notebook with red margins and green lines. Every step they'd taken, I now traced backward. Every locked drawer was matched with a record request. Every lie they whispered was written down in ink. The woman from the senior center. I visited a lawyer named Melina. Didn't look at me like I was paranoid. Gosh, she looked at me like someone who had seen the end of this movie too many times. She told me something that stayed with me. She said, people don't always steal money. Sometimes they steal time. They steal choice. They make you feel like you've already handed over the keys just because they smiled while taking them. I nodded. I understood. I had smiled, too, for too long. Melina helped me draft the letter. It wasn't dramatic. It was firm, legal. It listed every property line, every financial boundary, every item I was restoring to my name, and the clause that made it all possible. She said I didn't have to send it yet, but it would be ready when I was. On the way home, I stared out the window of the shuttle. We passed the hardware store where my husband used to buy nails in small brown paper bags. We passed the bakery that still carried the lemon squares I once packed into my son's lunchbox. The whole town seemed to move around me like a memory I wasn't done with. But this time, I wasn't floating through it. I was anchoring myself back inside it. At home, things were the same. They always are, right before they're not. He came in from the garage, towel over his shoulder, sweat glistening from his forehead. Like pride. She followed, sipping something green from a blender cup. They barely looked at me. I asked him if he'd be home tomorrow. He said probably not. Why? I told him I needed to go into the city for something important. He waved a hand, told me to take it easy, said I shouldn't overdo it. He didn't ask what it was. Didn't think it mattered. That night I made tea. Sat by the front window, the only one they hadn't updated. The swing on the porch creaked outside like it was waiting for me to come back. I didn't go. Not yet. Instead, I watched the shadows, listened to the house breathe, counted the ways I had been made small. And then I imagined what it would feel like to stand tall again, not to fight, but to reclaim. The difference is subtle, but it means everything. The next morning, I left before the sun. The house was still wrapped in that early gray hush when even the birds are quiet. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to. Let them wonder where I'd gone. Let silence be the start of my answer. The community shuttle pulled up exactly at 6:45. Same driver, Henry, with his thermos of coffee and quiet music playing low from the dash. He asked if I needed help with my bag. I told him no, but thank you. I had only one folder. It was light in my hand, but heavy in meaning. Everything I needed was inside. He asked where I was headed. I told him, downtown, family estate office. He nodded, but didn't pry. There's a kindness in people who've learned to hold space without questions. The ride took just under an hour. Past fields, rows of shuttered shops, and that bend in the road where my husband once taught our son to drive. I could still see them. In my mind, the flash of brake lights, the slow roll forward, my husband laughing with one hand on the wheel from the passenger seat. That version of my son, nervous, grateful, looking toward us both like he couldn't imagine a life without us. I missed him more than I could admit, but I'd stopped mourning who he used to be. Now I was protecting what remained of me, Melina's office was on the third floor of a building with cracked tile and potted plants that had outgrown their corners. The kind of place that didn't waste money on shine but spent its energy well. I liked it immediately. She greeted me like an old friend. No clipboard, no waiting room silence. It's just a pot of fresh coffee and a table cleared of everything but possibility. I handed her the folder. She laid out the papers one by one like cards in a quiet game. "Here's the clause that preserves your name on the deed," she said. "Here's your pension still deposited under your SSN, still separate. Here's the account they didn't think you'd remember. The one you opened in 1992 when you first started putting away bits of grocery money in secret. Here's the letter from the notary. Here's the record of the post office box not registered under your name, not connected legally to you. And this one. Here's the copy of the trust document they drafted without your full consent. She tapped it gently. Her nail was painted a pale gray, soft like a cloud. "Would you like to challenge this?" she asked. "Or would you like to override it altogether?" I looked at the paper for a long time. They had built a plan around me. Counted on my silence. Counted on my exhaustion. Counted wrong. I told her I wanted to override it. Quietly, legally, without warning. She smiled, small and steady. Said she would prepare the forms. By the time they noticed, she said everything would already be set in motion. I signed my name 6 times that day. Each one felt like a breath returning to my lungs. Not angry, just awake. When I left her office, the sky had shifted. A patch of light broke through the gray. I stood at the curb and tilted my face upward, letting the sun touch the side of my cheek. It had been a long time since I'd felt warmth. That didn't feel borrowed. Henry picked me up exactly on time. Said nothing about the change in my eyes. But I think he noticed on the way home. I asked him to take a different route. We passed a little complex of one-bedroom apartments, low buildings, with porches, wind chimes hanging from awnings, and tomato plants in terracotta pots on railings. I asked if he'd mind pulling over. I stepped out. Walked the path. There was a vacancy sign in the window. No gate, no guards, just space. Quiet, affordable, dignified space. I wrote down the number. Pressed the paper into my coat pocket. It felt like a secret, but not the kind that hurt. The kind that waits patiently for its moment to bloom. When I got home, the front door was unlocked. Music played upstairs. The blender was on. They hadn't noticed I'd been gone. I walked through the living room and sat in the chair by the window, the only one left that still had its original cushion. I placed the folder in my lap and stared out through the glass. The mailbox outside tilted slightly, its flag never quite able to stand all the way up. They thought they were smart. They thought I was slow. But they'd forgotten what I survived. To get here, they never saw the years I worked 2 jobs while taking night classes. Never saw me push through labor with no epidural because the clinic was full. Never saw me walk home with frozen toes because the car battery died and I didn't have the money to fix it. They saw only what they wanted, a woman in slippers. A soft voice, a fading memory. But memory is tricky. You think it's gone? Until something stirs it. And then it returns, whole and sharp. That afternoon, while they were still out, I opened my laptop, typed up a letter, simple, direct, final. I told them I had made some changes, that I had reviewed the property and financial arrangements, that my affairs were now being managed independently, that they no longer needed to worry about my mail or my medications or my future. I didn't threaten, I didn't accuse. Simply INFORMED. I printed 2 copies, sealed them in plain envelopes, left one on the kitchen counter, slipped the other under their bedroom door, and then I poured myself a glass of water, added a slice of lemon, and sat in the swing on the porch. For the first time in months, it creaked gently, like it had been waiting for me, and I rocked back and forth, not hiding, not afraid, quietly beginning. That night, the house was quieter than usual. Not peaceful, not like before, but thin, stretched like it was holding its breath. They had read the letters. I knew. I didn't need to check for fingerprints or ask questions. You can always feel the shift when someone realizes you've changed the rules. He didn't say anything at dinner, just nodded when I passed the peas and tapped on his phone. When she talked about gym equipment arriving next week, I waited for a glance, a twitch, some crack in the surface. Nothing. But she looked different, not angry, worried. That's how I knew it had worked. They weren't used to me acting without permission, weren't prepared for me to move without noise. The next morning, she knocked on my door, the guest room. Still cold despite the new curtains she had finally remembered to hang last month. She peeked in and asked how I was feeling. Her voice was syrupy, stretched thin over something sour. I said I was fine and smiled. She stood there for a moment too long, then asked if I needed help with anything. I told her I didn't. Then she asked if we could all talk later just to make sure we're on the same page. I said I'd think about it when she left. I sat on the edge of the bed and breathed. It had begun. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was a man in a tight jacket and expensive shoes, holding a clipboard. He asked for me by name, said he was from the family trust firm and had a few updates that required signatures. I told him to wait, closed the door gently, walked to the kitchen. I pulled open the drawer where she kept pens and measuring tape and scented envelopes, and I took out the letter Melina had helped me draft. I brought it back to the door, handed it to him, told him to forward any further inquiries to my attorney. He blinked, paused, then asked if I was sure. I told him I was. More sure than they ever expected me to be. When he left, I stood at the window and watched him walk to his car, type something into his phone, and drive away with less certainty than he'd arrived with. Later that evening, I walked into the backyard. The air was cool and still. It's that tiny wind that comes before a storm, but doesn't carry rain, just tension. The swing was there, untouched, ropes worn smooth where my hands used to grip them. I didn't sit this time, just stood nearby listening. I could hear them through the open windows. She was upset, asking why he hadn't told her about the changes. He was defensive, said he didn't think I'd notice anything, said he thought I wouldn't understand the documents, said she was just sitting in the guest room. How was I supposed to know she still cared about all that? Still cared that as if my silence meant surrender? As if kindness had made me incapable of remembering my own worth? I stood there a little longer, then walked back inside and closed my door. They didn't knock. Not that night. I spent the next few days in motion. Not rushed, but purposeful. I called the manager of the apartment complex I'd visited on the way home from the city. Told her I was interested. We talked about deposit options, timelines, moving services. Said she had a unit that overlooked a small garden. I said, that sounded just right. I started packing at night, quietly, methodically. Not everything, just the things that mattered. My husband's jacket, the framed photo of my mother from 1952, a scarf my granddaughter gave me before she stopped calling, the wooden spoon I had stirred countless pots of soup with when my son had colds, fevers, heartbreaks. Each item felt like a quiet declaration. I existed here, I gave here. I mattered here. One evening I walked past the hallway mirror, the long, narrow one she'd bought to make the space feel taller. I looked at myself, not in passing, not accidentally. I looked on purpose, held my own eyes the way I used to hold his when he was little and scared. I looked older, of course I did. But not weak, not lost. I looked like someone who had stopped waiting. The following week, I made one final appointment with the bank. I wanted to transfer the remaining funds from the joint account into the private one I had reactivated with Melina's help. Just a formality, she'd said. But it felt like something more. The teller was polite. She asked if I was sure. I nodded. And when she printed the confirmation, I tucked it neatly into my folder. That night, I left it on the kitchen table. It's the same table where I used to slice fruit for his lunch. It's the same one she covered in fitness magazines and open bills. I left the folder there with one note on top. I'll be moving out next week. The house is no longer in your name. My attorney can answer any questions. Please don't contact me directly. I didn't sign it. Didn't need to. They would know. The next morning, they were both sitting at the table when I came in to boil water. She was pale. It looked like he hadn't slept. She said, "You didn't have to do all this." I said, "No, but I could." I did. He said nothing, just stared at the folder like it had betrayed him. But it hadn't. It had just told the truth. In black ink, in legal typeface, with no room left for interpretation. I poured my tea, carried it to the porch, let the steam rise in the morning air, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in my own life. The final days in the house moved slowly, like the last few seconds of a song you used to love, still beautiful, but already fading. I woke early and stayed quiet. I boxed what was mine and left the rest untouched. Not out of kindness, out of clarity. Some things don't belong to you once you see the truth, for who they were meant to serve. I let go of the fancy dishes I'd once saved for holidays. She never liked them, said they were too floral. I left behind the couch. I had picked out after my husband died the one he and I had planned to grow old on. It sagged now, tired and unfamiliar. I didn't need it. What I did need, I carried with care. The letters he wrote to me from college, crumpled and full of hope. The necklace my mother gave me when my son was born. The recipe book with notes. In the margins, written in my hand, things like, "Add cinnamon, only if he's not in a mood, and let this simmer. It forgives late stirring." I wrap those pages in tissue paper, like glass. Because some memories aren't just reminders. They're evidence. I didn't tell them which day I was leaving, only that it would be soon. She tried asking again, when, where, why. I said I'd already answered. She said it felt cold. I told her it wasn't cold, was finished. The night before I left, I sat out back under the old willow tree. The ground was still damp from last week's rain, and the air smelled faintly of rosemary and grass. I used to sit there when my son was little, watching him kick a ball into the fence, pretending he was playing in the World Cup. He always looked back to see if I was watching. It's good. And I always was. That night, I didn't expect anyone to look back, and no one did. I stood and brushed the dirt from my hands, whispered a goodbye. I didn't need to say out loud, to the tree, to the ghosts, to the woman I used to be inside those walls. The next morning, the movers came right on time. 2 men and a woman, strong, efficient, kind. They didn't ask questions when I pointed out what to take, didn't flinch when I said, "Leave the rest." I liked that about them. They saw me not as someone fragile, but as someone in charge, as they. Loaded the truck, she came outside, still in her robe, holding a mug she wasn't drinking from. She stood there for a long time, like she wanted to say something meaningful. But when she finally spoke, it was this: "You didn't even try to talk." This through, I almost laughed. But I didn't. I looked her in the eyes and said, "You only think I didn't talk because you stopped listening a long time ago." She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, then closed it, and turned back toward the house. He didn't come out. At all, not even when the front door slammed by accident. Not when the truck pulled out of the driveway. Not when the porch swing moved on its own. A last sigh from the old place that had once held us. The apartment was waiting for me. 2nd floor, garden facing. It's a quiet place with soft light and clean corners. I walked in and stood there for a while, just breathing. There was no gym here, no blender in the hallway. No footsteps stomping upstairs to remind me I was an inconvenience. Just space. Honest, peaceful space. I unpacked slowly over the next few days, hung photos with pushpins, lined my cupboard with jars of lentils and tea, put fresh flowers on the little round table near the window, and in the evenings I walked down the block, past small porches with wind chimes and potted plants. People waved, smiled without suspicion. A woman in 3C introduced herself as Joy. She asked if I liked puzzles. I told her I used to. She said, "Well then, you still do," and handed me a half-completed one on a piece of cardboard. The pieces didn't quite fit the way I remembered, but I didn't mind. That's the thing about starting over. You stop needing things to be perfect. You just need them to be yours. A week later, I received a certified letter from my son. His handwriting on the envelope, still neat, still small, still trying to contain everything inside, was a single sheet. He wrote that he was sorry things had gotten complicated, that he thought he was helping, that he never meant for me to feel pushed out, that he didn't realize how far things had gone until I reminded him. No mention of the erased paperwork. No apology for redirecting my mail. No acknowledgement of the conversations I'd overheard through the vents. Just that word, complicated. I folded the letter in half, then in half again, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond because some silences aren't wounds. They're boundaries. I had tried with kindness, with patience, presence, and now with absence, the real kind. The apartment settled around me like soft fabric. Days passed without sharp edges. I would wake when the light shifted through the curtains, not because of footsteps or slammed cupboards or her voice echoing down the stairs. I made tea, the way I liked it, with too much honey and a thin slice of ginger. The silence here wasn't hollow. It was chosen. It tasted like something earned. Sometimes I would catch myself waiting, listening for the weight of guilt to return, but it never did. Grief, maybe, yes, that showed up still, but grief is honest. It walks beside you, doesn't pretend to be love while hollowing out your voice. I kept busy, reclaiming as a quiet kind of work. I visited the community garden on Thursdays, sat on the bench beneath the plum tree, watching strangers pull weeds and tend herbs. I started writing things down again in a little blue notebook Joy had left at my door, with a note tucked inside that said, "You look like someone who's still writing." And I was. In a way, not novels, not even stories. Just memories. Fragments, moments I refused to let them rewrite. I wrote about my son's first fever. How he clung to me like I was the only solid thing left in the world. I wrote about the time he fell, asleep in the car, clutching a paper crown he'd made for me. I wrote about his laugh when he was 8, before money, before ambition, before the cold practicality took root in him, like frost spreading through a field. I wrote about her too, but not often, not with bitterness, just as a warning, a shape to recognize should I ever meet her again in another form. Some days I got letters, not from him, not from her, from my old friend Anna, the one who introduced me to Melina. From a neighbor back near the old house who said she missed our porch conversations and the smell of my rosemary bread. From the librarian who used to hold extra books for me, who found a copy of a poetry collection I loved and mailed it. Without a note, there's a strange kind of comfort in being remembered by people who don't benefit from you. Their love isn't laced with obligation or performance. It's simple and real. One afternoon, while watering the single basil plant on my windowsill, I got a call from Melina. She said the final paperwork had gone through. The house had officially sold. My name had been cleared from any remaining joint ownerships. The proceeds had been transferred to the private account we had opened in my name only. She paused, said she hoped I felt free. I told her freedom didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like sleeping through the night. It felt like choosing your own spoon. It felt like silence that didn't hurt. She understood. She always did. That night, I took a long walk. No destination, just movement. The air was warm, and the sky held that pale orange bruising of twilight, the kind of color that makes you pause even if you don't know why. I passed children playing with sidewalk chalk, dogs barking through fences, couples arguing softly. On stoops, laughter tumbling out of open windows. All of it, life in motion. I was part of it again, not just watching it from a corner of someone else's world. When I got back, I opened the drawer where I had placed his letter, folded, unsigned. Careful, I read it again. The words hadn't changed. I had it no longer pulled at me. It no longer sounded like a door left ajar. It sounded like what it was, a man too used to getting his way, too uncomfortable with a woman who finally stepped outside the lines he drew for her. There was no room in his letter for accountability, only preservation, only image. And I am done being a backdrop for anyone else's reputation. So I lit a small candle, tore the letter slowly, watched the pieces curl into the flame, one by one, no spectacle, no rage. Just closure. Some endings don't need applause. They just need to be finished. I sat by the window after that, cradling a cup of tea, the basil leaves brushing the glass whenever the breeze stirred. I thought about legacy, not money, not property, but memory. How we are remembered, and by whom that they will tell their version, I'm sure. I've made peace with that. She will say I was difficult. He will say I was confused. They might say I left too soon or too cold. But the truth is here, in my handwriting, in my stillness, in the sound of my own name spoken only by me, and in the choice I made, finally. To put myself back at the center of my story, it was a Thursday when the doctor's office called, not the new one they'd chosen for me, but the one I had returned, too quietly, without fanfare after moving out. A kind nurse named Eliza left a message on my answering machine. Her voice warm and a little raspy, like someone who'd smoked in college but gave it up for herbal tea. She said the results came back normal. Everything looked good, she ended, with you're doing better than most, which made me smile. Just a little. I didn't need medical validation to know I was healing. But it helped, in a quiet way. I hung up and went to the window. The garden below was starting to bloom late summer flowers pushing through cracks in the soil like they'd made a decision about survival and weren't asking for permission. I felt like that people think freedom is a grand gesture. Running away, cutting ties, shouting truth from the rooftops. But more often, it's the choice to water your own basil plant, to make your own appointments, to no longer explain why you need a room of your own. That day, I took a walk to the grocery store. No one asked where I was going. No one told me to call if I got confused. No one watched the clock to make sure I returned on time. I walked past the freezer aisle without rushing, stood for 5 minutes in front of the yogurt shelf, just because I could. I bought the kind with real vanilla beans and a little jar of Delots honey. At checkout, the cashier asked if I qualified for the senior discount, and I laughed and said yes, with more pride than I expected. I carried my own bags home. On the walk back, I passed a mother with a small child. The girl was tugging at her hand, pointing at a puppy behind a gate. The mother barely looked. She was on her phone, nodding but not hearing. And I felt something rise in my throat, not sorrow, not judgment, just a small echo. A memory of the days when I was that mother, too tired to always notice, stretched to see the whole of him. But I always came back to attention. I always looked. Even if it took a second too long, I always looked. That child grew into a man who stopped seeing me, and now I was learning to see myself again. When I got home, there was a letter waiting at my door. Plain white envelope. My name written in a hand I recognized. I stood there, key in hand, letting the air settle around me. Then I opened it. This time, it was longer, neater. It tried to sound calm. He said he missed me, that things had gone too far, that he didn't expect me to cut them out completely, that he thought we could come to some kind of agreement. His words circled the real issue like a dog around a locked door, close, cautious, unwilling to confront what he had truly done. He wrote that she felt misunderstood, that she was trying her best, that they never wanted to hurt me, that I had overreacted. That word overreacted sat like stone in the middle of the page. It was a familiar trick. Reframe the damage as drama. Turn my defense into exaggeration. Choir version of erasure. It's the same tune, just played softer. He asked if we could meet. Neutral ground, he said. Somewhere public. But I didn't want neutral. I wanted honest. And I had already found that with myself, I didn't answer the letter. I placed it in the same drawer where the torn-up trust documents had gone. Kind of archive. Not of pain, but of proof. That week, Joy invited me to the library for a community poetry reading. I almost said no. The old instinct, stay. Stay small. But I caught myself. I said yes. Wore a navy blouse I hadn't touched in years. Put on a pair of earrings I'd nearly given away. The reading was in the back of the library, folding chairs set up in neat rows. People read poems about birds, about grief, about coffee cups left full. Nothing dramatic, nothing polished. Just real words spoken by people who hadn't been heard in a while. When they asked if anyone else wanted to share, my hand rose before I could think. It surprised even me. I stepped up, palms warm, knees a little stiff, and I read from my notebook a page about the porch swing, about silence that isn't empty, about being replaced and still choosing to bloom. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They just sat with it. And then, softly, one by one, they began to applaud. Not loud, but steady. Afterward, Joy hugged me. She didn't say, "Good job." She said, "That was real." That night back home, I opened the window. Let the breeze stir the curtain. Sat in my chair with bare feet on the cool floor, and I said out loud, not to anyone in particular, "I'm proud of me." The words felt strange at first, like trying on a coat I never thought I could afford, but they fit. And they were mine. A few weeks passed before I heard from him again. This time, it was a text. Just one line. "Can we meet?" Just you and me. No mention of her. No pretense of control. No layered explanations. For a moment, I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered. Then I turned the phone over on the table, face down like it had said something inappropriate. I made no decision right away. I'd learned that silence could be its own kind of answer. Not passive, not afraid, just considered. Later that day, I sat by the window again. Same chair, same curtain, lifting gently at the hem. The basil plant had grown to new leaves. Small, tentative, but green and determined. I smiled at it, said out loud, "You're trying, so am I." The following morning I replied, "1 hour, no expectations, public place, your choice." He chose a coffee shop near the old park. Not too far. Not too close. It was a place we used to visit. When he was small, back when he'd cling to my hand and ask for marshmallows in his cocoa. The tables were different now, more modern. But the same old bell jingled above the door when I walked in. He was already there. I saw him before he saw me. Hair neater, jaw tighter. His fingers tapped the edge of a to-go cup, restless. When he looked up and saw me, something flickered. Not quite relief. Not quite regret. Just recognition. I sat down. He said my name softly. I said nothing. Then he said what I think he'd rehearsed. He said he was sorry, but he didn't see it until it was too late, that he'd let things get out of hand, that he thought he was helping, that they thought they were doing the responsible thing, that maybe they got carried away. He said carried away like it was a gust of wind that had swept them into betrayal. He looked at me and said, "I thought you were slowing down, Mom." And I said, "I was tired." There's a difference. He looked like he'd been slapped, not hard. Just truthfully, he asked how I was. I told him I was better. He asked where I'd gone. I said somewhere that didn't require me to earn rest. He nodded, took a sip of coffee, then asked if there was a way forward. I looked at him for a long time. I saw everything. The baby I held when I still had stitches. The boy who'd fallen asleep against my arm during late movies. The teenager who stopped saying I love you, but still checked that I'd locked the door. The young man who stood by me at his wedding. The grown man who slowly, deliberately, tried to remove me from my own life. All of it lived in his face. I said, "Forward is a path I'll choose, not one you'll draw for me." He nodded again, slowly this time. Like he heard it differently, he said. He missed me. I said, "Missing someone doesn't undo what you did while they were still there." He closed his eyes, took a breath. I watched him try to settle into the silence I now carried with me like armor. He asked if I hated him. I said, "I don't, but I no longer place my well-being in your hands." He looked out the window. There was a child across the street, skipping alone down the sidewalk. dragging a bright red ribbon behind her like a kite with no sky. He said he wanted to make things right. I said, then you'll need to start by accepting that I get to decide what right looks like now. I stood up. He didn't stop me. I told him thank you not for what he did, for meeting me here face to face without pretending anymore. He said he'd like to call again. I said you can try. I'll decide. And I walked out. The bell jingled again. The sun was a little lower. The breeze tugged at the edge of my jacket like it was time to go home, and I did. Back to the apartment. Back to the basil. Back to the quiet that didn't question me. That night, I didn't replay the conversation. I let it stay in its hour, didn't stretch it into more than it was. Not an apology, not a reckoning. It's just a checkpoint. Proof that I had not disappeared. That I had not gone mad or soft or forgetful. That I had simply stopped letting love be used as a leash. I lit a candle, made a small bowl of soup, watched the shadows climb the wall slowly, peacefully. The phone sat on the table, still. No more messages. I didn't need them, because for the first time in years, I was not waiting to be chosen. I was already home. I didn't hear from him for a while after that, and that was fine. Sometimes distance isn't punishment. It's recovery. A chance to hear your own thoughts without someone else's needs pressing against them. I settled into a rhythm at the apartment. Mornings were soft, warm socks on cold tile, tea steeped in silence, the gentle sound of traffic beginning somewhere. Down the street, I started walking more. Not far, just enough. I learned the names of the trees on my block. Red maple, sweet gum, jacaranda. I greeted them like neighbors. Joy and I began meeting every Sunday for coffee and puzzles. She brought a bag of mismatched pieces each week, ones collected from thrift shops and community bins. No boxes, no pictures. Just fragments and time. She said it was good for the brain. Kai told her it was good for the heart. We never rushed. Sometimes we didn't speak, just piece things together slowly, patiently, even when the corners didn't make sense right away. One Sunday, she asked me if I'd ever consider volunteering. I laughed at first. But she said there was a program at the library reading buddies for children who struggled with words. Just an hour a week. Nothing demanding. I told her I'd think about it. Then I said yes. The first day I sat across from a girl named Lena, 8 years old, ponytail, too tight. Wrinkled pink sweatshirt. She wouldn't look at me directly. She held a book about birds but didn't open it. I asked her if she liked stories. She shrugged, so I said you don't have to read it. Just tell me what the picture looks like. She stared at the cover, said the bird looked like it was flying away from something. I nodded, said sometimes that's what birds do. She looked at me then, and we began, week after week. We met at the same table. Sometimes we read. Sometimes we just talked about things that scared her. Thunderstorms, pop quizzes. Saying the wrong answer out loud. I told her once that grown-ups feel scared too. She said, but you're old. Don't you know everything? And I said, no, but I've stopped pretending that I do. She smiled at that afterward. I'd walk home slower than usual. Let the air fill me. Let the echoes of her voice follow me all the way to the door. The apartment started feeling fuller. Not cluttered, just lived in. I bought a second chair for the balcony. Not for guests. Just so it wouldn't look like I was always alone. One afternoon, while I was repotting a small plant, the phone rang. I recognized the number. It was him. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. He said hello, like it was the first time. Like all the other hellos had belonged to someone else. He asked if I was doing well. I said I was. He said he'd been thinking. That he'd talked to someone, counselor, that he realized things he hadn't understood before. He said he was sorry again, but differently this time, not as a gesture, or as a truth. He said he'd tried to control things because he was afraid of losing me, afraid of the unpredictability of aging, afraid of what people would think if I started showing signs of decline. He said he confused protection with possession, and I stayed quiet. because I needed to be sure he wasn't just practicing new words. I needed to hear if he meant them. Then he said something I hadn't expected. He said I've taken my name off the trust. He said he spoke to a lawyer, that the new papers were signed and notarized, that my estate, small as it was, now belonged only to me. Without contingency, without management. Without hidden doors, he said he would send me a copy. And I could verify everything with anyone I trusted. I didn't speak for a long time. I just watched the soil on my hands. The way it rested in the lines of my fingers like old history, and then I said, thank you. I didn't say I forgave him, didn't promise anything more. But thank you, when spoken honestly, can be a closing or a beginning. And I meant it as both. That evening, I lit a candle. This same one I'd burned after reading his last letter. Only this time, it wasn't about erasure. It was about marking a shift. Not a reunion, not a full return. But a new chapter. Quiet. Tentative. I sat on the balcony and watched the second chair. I didn't imagine him sitting there. Not yet, maybe. Not ever. But I liked that it was no longer empty by accident. It was empty by choice. There's a difference. Autumn came softly. The air turned thinner, cooler around the edges. Trees outside my window began letting go without ceremony, dropping yellow leaves like quiet confessions. The basil plant browned a little at the tips. I trimmed it back, told it, thank you. It'd done enough. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror for longer than usual, not out of vanity, not even curiosity. I just wanted to see myself, really see myself after everything. There were more lines now. My skin had softened, loosened. My hair fully silver, caught the light in ways it never used to. And behind the eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. Not beauty, not even strength. Stillness, not the kind born from surrender. The kind born from survival. I remembered what it felt like to be overlooked in that same reflection. How many mornings I'd brushed my teeth in silence while she clanged dishes in the kitchen and he checked his phone. The gym music already pulsing through the floor. They had lived above me, round me, near me, but never with me. Now every object in this place held my touch. The spoon I reached for each morning. The worn slippers that stayed just beside the bed. The scarf hanging on the doorknob, waiting for the first true chill. Everything here remembered me. That day I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out a small suitcase from the closet. Not because I needed to leave, but because I wanted to go somewhere. Anywhere under my own direction. I booked a train. It's one night, 2 towns over. A little in near a lake I used to visit with my husband when we still believed weekends could solve everything. No one knew I was going. Not Joy, not the librarian, not even him. And it felt like a secret I deserved to keep. When I boarded the train, I chose a window seat. The sun slanted in and touched the pages of the book I pretended to read. But mostly I watched. Fields, roads, broken fences. Long stretches of nothing. And then, eventually, water. I hadn't realized how much I missed seeing a horizon dot at the inn. They gave me a key with a real tag, not a card, but a metal key, engraved with the room number like something out of time. I opened the door and stood there. No voices, no motion above or below. Just the soft hum of heat coming from the old vent in the wall. The window faced the lake. It wasn't grand, but it was open, a view that asked for nothing but attention. That night, I took myself to dinner. 1 chair, 1 table, 1 menu I read without explaining anything to anyone. The waitress asked if I was waiting on someone. Said no, they're waiting on me now. She laughed, said that was the best answer she'd heard all day. I ordered soup, bread, a glass of white wine I couldn't pronounce. And I ate slowly, without rush, without the need to finish. I left a generous tip. And I walked back along the gravel path with stars above me, quiet, unbothered, uncurious. Back in the room, I undressed slowly. Folded everything, pulled the sheets back like I was peeling open a new beginning, and I slept, not like a woman hiding, Not like a woman avoiding, but like a woman who had returned not to a place, but to herself. In the morning, I wrote a letter. Not to be sent. It's just for me. I wrote, "You remembered who you are. You stopped begging to be seen. You made silence into shelter. You held your ground and it held you back. You rose, not dramatically, not loudly, but fully, and then I folded the letter, slipped it between the pages of the poetry book Joy had given me, and packed my things. Thought the train ride home was different. Not because the landscape changed, but because I had. I walked through my apartment door and nothing was out of place. That's the quiet grace of living alone. No one moves what you love without asking. Later that week, Joy noticed something in me. She didn't ask, but she smiled differently. She said, "You look settled." I said, "I think I am." We worked through a puzzle with too many green pieces. Leaves, grass, we weren't sure. We didn't mind. We kept going. And later at home, I sat by the window again, same light, same plant, same breath. And I realized I had nothing left to prove. Not to him, not to her, not even to the version of me who stayed too long. I had done the thing most people only dream of. I'd walked away with my name intact. It was a gray morning when the final envelope arrived. Not from him, not from her. It's from the bank, an official notice. Stamped, signed, final dot. It confirmed the last transfer, the sale of the old house, the dissolution of the shared account, the removal of his name from every document where it didn't belong. Just mine now, clean and unarguable. I held it in my hands for a long time, not because I was surprised, because of how quiet it felt. No celebration, no fireworks, just the slow, full exhale of something long overdue. I placed it in the file drawer in my hallway, labeled it proof, not for a judge, not for an argument, just for me. Later, I made tea. Jasmine used the good cup, the one with a small crack near the rim. It never leaked, just reminded you to be careful. I sat on the balcony, watched a man walk his dog slow and patient, the kind of walk that says, "I have nowhere else to be right now." And I realized I had nowhere else to be either. And that was a kind of wealth no one could steal. That same day, I got a letter from Lena, the little girl from the reading program. It was written in purple ink, all capital letters, full of misspellings and joy. She wrote, "Dear Miss M, thank you for helping me like books. My dad says I read better now. I think you are like a witch, but nice." I laughed out loud, folded the note like it was treasure, taped it to the fridge with a butterfly magnet I'd found at a flea market. I thought about how I used to tape up spelling tests and drawings for my son when he was little. Now I had this, a crooked letter from a child who didn't owe me anything, who liked me simply because I showed up. That meant something, maybe everything. A few days later, Joy asked if I wanted to go with her to a town hall meeting. She said there was talk of closing the local garden space. Said people were upset but didn't know what to say. I went. Not because I knew how to stop a budget cut. It's because I remembered what it felt like to be pushed out of something slowly, politely, and without resistance. There were about 30 people in the room. Most of them tired, some angry, a few already resigned. When it came time for community input, no one stood, so I did. I didn't speak like a hero. I just told the truth. I said that the garden wasn't just dirt. It was memory. It was effort. Was the only space where some people still felt useful. I said, "You can't measure that on a spreadsheet." Someone clapped, then another. And soon it filled the room. We didn't win that night, but we weren't invisible either. And sometimes that's the first step. Afterward, a woman approached me. Said she used to see me at the park years ago with a boy who had scraped knees and a loud laugh. I smiled, said yes, that was my son. She paused, then said, "He looked at you like you were the whole world." And I said, "He did, once we didn't say anything else." We didn't need to. On the walk home, I thought about that time. It's how small we were. Just the two of us against everything. It's how hard I worked to build a life solid enough for him to stand on. How quickly he'd decided that the same foundation no longer mattered once he had a taller view. But that's the thing about elevation. It doesn't always mean clarity. Sometimes you only see what you want to see from up high down here, where things grow, where things hurt and heal and fall apart and come back. That's where the truth lives. And I'm glad I stayed here. Glad I didn't try to climb back up to prove anything. The next morning, I got a voicemail. His voice quiet. He said he'd been by the house. That it looked different now. That the porch swing was gone. That the new owners had painted the shutters white. He said it didn't feel like home. Not anymore. Not without me in it. And I stood in the kitchen, listening. Letting that sentence breathe. Not without me in it. He hadn't said that in years. He didn't ask me to call back. Didn't ask to visit. Just left his voice like a bookmark in a chapter. We might never reopen. I didn't call back. But I didn't erase it either. I let it stay. Some truths don't need a reply. It's just room to echo. That evening, I made soup. The kind he used to love. Carrots, leeks, a touch of nutmeg. I made it for myself this time. A full pot, half frozen in containers for later. I sat at the table, just one place set, and I ate slowly. No rush, no guilt. No need to be anyone else. When I was done, I washed the dishes and left the kitchen light on. Not because I was afraid, it's because I finally knew the difference between being alone and being at peace. It rained the morning I finished unpacking the last box, not a heavy rain, just a quiet one. It's the kind that falls softly against the windows and makes you grateful to be inside. I stood barefoot in the middle of the living room, holding a ceramic bowl wrapped in old newspaper. It was the last thing, a gift from my sister years ago, pale green with tiny cracks under the glaze. I'd nearly forgotten it. I placed it on the sideboard near the window, dropped in a few stones I'd collected from the lake on my short trip. Away, simple, unremarkable. But they grounded the room. The rain kept tapping, steady like breath. I made tea, sat near the window, watched the world blur just slightly as if it, too, was softening. And I thought, this is what it means to survive with dignity. Not revenge, not gloating, just presence. Ownership of your world. Own quiet corner of the world. The apartment smelled of lemon oil and wool blankets. There were no raised voices. No footsteps upstairs. No tension in the air. Just the sound of life moving forward in its own rhythm. There had been a time, not long ago, when I thought reclaiming my life meant losing everything. But I was wrong. I lost only what had already let go of me. And in return, found what was mine. My name returned to the paper. My decisions unfiltered by someone else's permission. My space no longer borrowed or conditional. And my voice not louder, just clearer. Joy stopped by later that afternoon. She brought a book of poems and a handful of cookies in a napkin. Said they were still warm. We sat side by side as we often did now, not needing to say much at one point. She looked over at me and said, "You seem taller lately." I smiled. I think I stopped crouching to fit where I didn't belong. We both laughed. Then we read a few pages aloud. One line stayed with me. She carried silence like a lantern, not to hide in, but to see by. I wrote it down later that evening. After Joy left, I took out the envelope from the bank one more time, read it once, then slid it into the back of Dialed. And we slid it into the back of the drawer and closed it gently, done, not forgotten, just finished. The next day, I returned to the garden. They decided to keep it open after all. Reworked the budget, moved a few numbers around. I wasn't the only one who had spoken, but they'd said my words helped tip the balance. I planted mint. Bent low to press the roots in with bare hands. Felt the dirt under my nails. The coolness of earth pulling me back into the realness of things. Lena came by with her father. She waved like I was someone she trusted, someone solid. Her father thanked me. Said she was reading at grade level now. That she was confident, curious, louder. I told him that was all her. He said, "But someone has to believe in you before you start believing in yourself." I nodded that night. I sat outside on my balcony, watching the sky fade into its deepest blue. I thought about legacy, not the kind that fits in a will, but the kind that lingers in rooms you once sat in words you gave to someone who needed them, in the way you leave behind light, not wait. My son had called once since the voicemail. A quiet check-in. No pressure, no expectation. I listened. I responded. I kept the boundaries clear. We weren't mended, but we were no longer pretending. That felt like enough. He asked if maybe one day he could visit, just for coffee. Just to see where I was? I said maybe. And I meant it. Because healing isn't the door you slam. It's the window you crack open when the room needs air. As the stars came out that night, I felt something lift. Not grief, not bitterness, but the long shadow of proving myself, finally pulling back. I didn't need to explain where I'd gone, or why I'd left, or how I'd survived. I was here, whole, still, free. I brought my tea back inside, turned out the lights, stood in the doorway of my bedroom, looking at the simple shape of it. Soft bed, folded blanket, books stacked neatly. Beside the lamp, no gym in place of me. No one managing my movements. It's just peace, honest and earned. I curled into the sheets, let the silence settle in, and I whispered to myself, not for the first time, but this time without hesitation. You made it, and I had, not through defiance, not through rage, but by choosing not to disappear, by holding the line of my own name, by refusing to be stored away like furniture in a garage. I didn't need a battle to win. I just needed a life that fit. And now, finally, I have it. Now I'm curious about you. Have you ever experienced something like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you stayed with me until now, thank you. I'll leave you with 2 other stories I think you'll love.